Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully you all are having a wonderful day today. So when it comes down to it, I thought that I would talk about this little video that overall was very particularly interesting. And overall, this little video that we're going to end up reviewing today is by the boxing channel known as Dante's Boxing Nation. I also apologize that I haven't posted much within the past few days. Overall, I did end up contracting a certain type of sickness, so overall I did end up having to recover. But hopefully, all in all, I will be able to post a little bit more calmly now. We'll see what happens because there is going to be some very, very big fights within these next few months. I believe now, of course, it is the month of March. I believe all in all that in April there is several big fights that are going to be happening, including that of the Tyson Fury versus Dillian White fight and the Oscar Valdez versus Shakur Stevenson fight. There's also going to be a few other fights from what I remember. And then, of course, in May, I believe we have Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol and possibly even a few others. But this video that I thought was very particularly interesting because once again, this is yet again another attempt overall basically for Dante's Boxing Nation to degrade Canelo Alvarez as the alleged #1 pound-for-pound fighter. And I've already said this a multitude of times. In my opinion, Canelo Alvarez, he is the clear #1 pound-for-pound fighter. I don't think that there really is another option available. The reason why I say that is because there's just no other fighter that on top of that, I mean, you can argue already that Canelo Alvarez is the most skilled fighter in all of boxing at this point in time, at least for his natural weight classes. But on top of that, there's just no fighter overall that even has close to what he has in terms of a resume. Because Canelo Alvarez already, I believe, is a 4-weight division champion. He's defeated a multitude of champions, a multitude of A-grade fighters, and I just don't think that there's any other fighter, in my view, overall that can really compete with his type of resume and with his record. But of course, Dante's Boxing Nation in regular type of fashion overall tries to do a hit job on Canelo Alvarez's career. Because as we all know, Dante's Boxing Nation, he has a very big racial issue with certain fighters overall that especially are not black fighters that are ranked as the #1 pound-for-pound. But anyways, we're going to see overall what Dante's Boxing Nation has to say. Let's get into it.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? So you just heard me say this in my very last video when it came to Jamel Charlo, calling out Canelo Alvarez, saying that he would beat Canelo Alvarez. I told you it's finally gotten to the point to where these black boxers are no longer afraid of the race.
If Jamel Charlo versus Canelo Alvarez actually happened, Jamel Charlo, he would end up overall in the ER. He would probably end up overall in a medicinally induced coma. Because Jamel Charlo, in my view, he has no legitimate chance against Canelo Alvarez. I don't even think that the better brother of the two, Mr. Jamal Charlo, has that high of a chance either. Jamel Charlo, he pretty much would have no chance whatsoever. Not only do I think that Canelo Alvarez would be way too big for him, his skill set would just be way too much.
Comments in the comment section, and they're coming out and they're saying what's really on their mind as opposed to just trying to cater to the popular narrative to be on the safe side. So while Shakur Stevenson was promoting his big fight against Oscar Valdez on April 30th, which is going to be a really, really good one, Shakur was asked to give his thoughts on Oscar Valdez training with Canelo Alvarez. You know, like how much that's going to help Oscar Valdez, etc., etc. And this is what Shakur Stevenson said.
How you deal with a guy trying to do that?
I mean, I'm going to say this, and people going to hate me for saying this. I don't care because I'm bold. Like, I take risks. I'm a risk taker. I say what's on my mind. I feel like if Canelo is my way, I feel like I would beat Canelo. I feel like my style, distance, I'm a boxer. Same way Floyd picked him apart, I would do the same. So that's my honest opinion. People could take it how they want to. So Canelo could tell him whatever you want.
You know, guys, I broke this down before. I've said this.
And Shakur Stevenson, of course, Shakur Stevenson, of course, for those of you all know that did not hear what he had to say, Shakur Stevenson basically was asked the question, well, how are you going to do, or overall, how do you prepare against someone like an Oscar Valdez who trains overall with Canelo Alvarez? Because, of course, many people all know, they do believe, just like myself, that Canelo Alvarez is the true #1 pound-for-pound fighter, and that he maybe even debatably is the most skilled fighter on the planet. And in my view, you certainly could debate that. But when it comes down to it, Shakur Stevenson basically responded and said, well, it doesn't matter to me anyway, because in my view, if we were in the same weight class, I more than likely would beat Canelo Alvarez anyway. And, you know, Shakur Stevenson, he has every right to say that. It's his opinion. It is what it is. He's a competitive fighter out there. And if you're a person all in all that believes that later on that you're going to be within that top 10 to top 5 pound-for-pound range, and maybe later on be debatably the number one pound for pound boxer in all of boxing, then of course you should have a mindset exactly like that. So I don't really have a problem with that. If you're a person that thinks of yourself as the true number one pound for pound boxer in all of boxing, which I think that Shakur Stevenson does believe that he is. He just doesn't have the accomplishments yet to show it. Overall, I think in his mind, I think that Shakur Stevenson, all in all, that he believes that he probably would beat Canelo Alvarez or anyone else within the higher weight classes. So it is what it is.
And I'm going to say it again. You have to understand what the term pound for pound even means. You know what it means? It means that you are so good that pound for pound, that means in any weight class you're in, if you and all of the other fighters, the top 10 pound for pound fighters, were all naturally the same weight, how would you fare against them, right? If Canelo Alvarez was fighting against Shakur Stevenson, Gervonta Tank Davis, Terrence Crawford, Vasyl Lomachenko, Devin Haney, Stephen Fulton, the Charlo brothers, and this is just to name a few, Canelo Alvarez would be the underdog in almost all of those fights. Pound for pound.
Like I said, first of all, I'm not sure if I would agree with that, but I'm not really a big fan overall of that point. And the reason why I'm not a fan of that point, the reason overall why I don't think that's a good argument is because you can debate all in all that there's a certain amount of other fighters out there. For example, especially the ones that are within the lighter weight classes, we can say all in all that, well, I believe that Shakur Stevenson and Gervonta Tank Davis and Lomachenko, that they would beat Canelo Alvarez, so they were in the same weight class. You can allege that all you want to. When it comes down to it, you certainly can allege that they look overall quicker when it comes down to it than what a Canelo Alvarez would be. But of course, that more than likely is going to, what they're going to be looked at as anyway, because they're lighter weight class fighters. And when you usually take a lighter weight class fighters, unless you're talking about anywhere below, 126, those fighters, at times usually are going to be looked at as more skilled than what the higher weight class fighters are, at least at certain times. Unless you're someone maybe like a Manny Pacquiao or Floyd Mayweather Jr., or a Canelo Alvarez, something of a sort. So like I said, I've never overall been a big fan of that argument, and the only reason why Dante really brings that up is due to discredit certain fighters in the first place. Because if you really truly truly have that opinion, you wouldn't overall be bitching and moaning that Deontay Wilder and Jermell Charlo at one point in time should have been on the top 10 pound for pound list. Because I can name you 20 to 30 fighters, in my opinion, I don't know, that are more skilled than both of those fighters. But anyway.
Now, if we're talking about all of them being the same weight naturally, right? If they were all fighting at light heavyweight, super middleweight, welterweight, whatever the division was. David Benavidez's father and trainer, he said that Canelo Alvarez would be an easier fight than the Charlo fight. He believes the Canelo...
Yeah, but come on, does David Benavidez and his corner really truly believe that? Or are they doing that all in all because they really want the Canelo Alvarez fight? Let's be real. All right, do these guys really truly believe that Canelo Alvarez, that he's easier to beat than a Charlo or Benavidez? Absolutely not. Let's be real. They understand overall that Canelo Alvarez is overall the main cash cow. They understand that he is the main guy to beat. That's why everyone wants that fight.
Fight would be easy. Once again, compared to a Charlo fight. David Benavidez's own promoter, he said that the Canelo fight would be easier than the Andrade fight. He said we would need more money to fight Andrade than we would to fight Canelo because Andrade is not...
No, he didn't really say all in all that the fight would be easier than the Andrade fight. What he said, or what the manager said, is that we would need more money against Andrade, and the reason why that is because Canelo Alvarez brings more to the table for your career. Whether you win or lose against him, you're facing the number one pound for pound fighter, not just the number one pound for pound fighter, but the main golden goose, the main cash cow. So whether you win or lose, it's going to be worth it for your fighter and also for the manager and everyone involved. But if you're facing someone that is very high risk and low reward, like a Demetrius Andrade, versus someone that's very high risk but also very, 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 very high reward, like a Canelo Alvarez, of course you're going to want that Canelo Alvarez fight instead, and you may even be willing to take less money because at the end of the day, the money that you're going to get from the Canelo Alvarez fight or later on overall because you fought Canelo Alvarez, you're going to be set for life.
An easy fight. This is his words, right? I asked Paul Andrade on the phone the other day, who would win a fight between Charlo and Canelo? He said Charlo. So my point is, if you listen to what the fight...
Right, but does he really truly believe that? Is no offense, but if you're a person that actually believes that either Charlo brother would more than likely, at least definitively, beat Canelo, you probably don't know that much about boxing. It just is what it is. Now, of course, everyone has their own opinion, but I've seen both Charlo brothers at their best. They're not beating Canelo Alvarez.
Fighters are saying that are around Canelo Alvarez's division, they're pretty much looking at Canelo like he's the Ryan Garcia of the division. Not saying that Ryan Garcia is as skilled as Canelo, but they see him as the easiest guy to beat in the division. Just like they...
No, they don't see him as the easiest guy to beat. They see him overall as the main number one guy, and they see him overall as the biggest legacy fight. And that's a big part of the reason why they say certain things like that over Canelo, because they want that fight so bad. That's why overall they're trying to entice Canelo by basically overall saying these things about them. But Canelo, he doesn't care. So, like I said, we'll see on the know what he ends up doing next after, this year. We'll see. I still would love to see the Jamal Charlo and David Benavidez fights. I just don't think that either of those fighters really have a 100% A+ shot in order to beat Canelo. I think that they're too limited. I think overall that, they're too hittable. But we'll see what happens.
See Ryan as the easiest to beat at lightweight. Now, that's not to say Canelo is easy to beat, because you do have to be a good fighter to beat him. It's just
you not only have to be a good fighter, you have to be a great fighter. There's only one fighter, all in all, that has ever beaten Canelo Alvarez definitively, and that is Floyd Mayweather Jr. In my opinion, the greatest fighter of the 2000s and 2010s. So, like I said, you not only have to be a great fighter to beat Canelo, you more than likely have to be an all-time great fighter, even to just push him to his limits like an Sonny Lara or Gennady Golovkin.
You that all the fighters, once again, in his division, they feel that he's the most flawed. This is
But like I said, how are you really going to quantify what Dante said earlier? Like with the Shakur Stevenson point, well, if Shakur and Canelo were in the same weight class, he would beat him. Well, how do we know that Shakur Stevenson would necessarily be the same fighter at a higher weight class? Do we really think all in all that he would have the same amount of speed? Do we really think all in all that he would have the same amount of foot speed? Now, there are certain fighters all in all that are at the heavier weight classes, and they still overall keep a great amount of speed. But how do we... This is what I'm saying. You can't really quantify any of that, because how the hell are you going to prove that? But anyway.
Further proof that when you do hear people say that Canelo Alvarez is pound for pound the best fighter in the world, they're telling you that he's pound for pound the most popular fighter in the world. I already told you.
Well, that point would work overall, Dante, if Canelo Alvarez didn't have the resume. And all in all, that basically his number one pound for pound spot was just pretty much banked off of overall his popularity and how watchable Canelo Alvarez is. But Canelo Alvarez almost, not to compare him completely to this, he's almost like Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, a lot of people, they take a look at Michael Jordan and they say, oh, well, the only reason why people, like Michael Jordan is because he's so nostalgic when it comes down to it. And all in all, he was in a weaker era, blah, blah, blah. They make all these excuses. And they say he's not truly the number one, it's LeBron James or someone else, so people basically on news media, circles like a Shannon Sharp and Nick Wright, they basically try to degrade his career. But at the end of the day, there's no degrading a 5-time MVP, a 6-time NBA Finals champion, a 6-time overall NBA Finals MVP, and someone that had a Defensive Player of the Year award and several overall defensive accolades. So, like I said, the question is, overall, when we ask ourselves that question, is Canelo Alvarez just purely ranked as the number one pound for pound fighter because he's the most popular fighter in all of boxing? You can make that point if you want to, but I don't think all in all that it's really a great argument. And the reason why I say that is because Canelo Alvarez, when you take a look at his resume, there's no other person overall that has that type of resume out there. And this next fight against Dimitri Bivol, this would almost be like if Terrence Crawford, because a lot of people like to rank him as number one pound for pound. So let me overall, bring this up. Let's also realize that Canelo Alvarez, that now for a couple of years, he's beaten certain opponents that have been bigger than him. And that all in all, that he basically just completely unified a very decently talented 168-pound division. And that in his next fight, he's going to go after Dimitri Bivol, who is one of the more skilled fighters on the planet. In my view, Dimitri Bivol is more skilled than some of the lighter weight class fighters that I've seen. He's certainly more skilled than anyone that I see at 154. But of course, Dante, he would not go along with that narrative because that would kill overall a certain amount of his narratives. But kind of like what this Canelo Alvarez versus Dimitri Bivol fight would be, You know what this fight kind of would be like? It would be like if Terrence Crawford at his prime, which is right now, if he fought a prime Sonny Lara, back in the day, and he went up, a weight class, and he was fighting a guy that was a little bit bigger than him when it came down to it, and a person that was decently smart, decently slick. That's overall what that fight would be like. It would be a fantastic fight to watch. It's going to be the same thing here. So Canelo Alvarez, this next fight against Dimitri Bivol, like I said, there's a certain amount of people that say, oh, well, stop hyping up Dimitri Bivol. He's not that good. No, Dimitri Bivol is an exceptional fighter. There's no overall doubt about that. No doubt about that whatsoever.
I broke this down in the Charlo fight. It's a great video. If you haven't watched it, go watch it. It's the last video I uploaded. And I explained in that video that, a lot of these black fighters, they don't want to deal with the hate, as Shakur Stevenson put it. They don't want to have their comment section flooded with racist comments because they're speaking their mind. And they're saying, I would beat this guy. Or, he has a lot of flaws. He's not
right, but there's also a certain amount of black fighters that have given credit to Canelo Alvarez and also called him the number one pound for pound. Gervonta Tank Davis and Devin Haney clearly overall believe that, but apparently you're not going to mention that. But anyway.
Not as good as people are saying he is. Those type of comments will make you a target for some of the most racist comments on the internet.
Right, but is Canelo Alvarez really someone that is overhyped? Is he really someone all in all that is not as good as what a lot of people say? Once again, look at the fights that Dante's Boxing Nation is calling for Canelo Alvarez. Even at one point in time, he wanted him to face someone like Alexander Usyk. He wanted him to face someone that is debatably, in my opinion, the second best pound-for-pound fighter in the world and someone who would have been 30 pounds heavier than him.
When you're obviously black. But you're a boxer. You put your life on the line every time you get in the ring, so you can't be afraid of no damn comments on the internet. As long as you keep winning, you can't be denied. And that's what Floyd Mayweather proved. And Shakur Stevenson is doing just that right now. No matter what you try to say to cater to these racist fans, trying to praise Canelo Alvarez or saying Viva Mexico like Charlo said a while ago, no matter what you say, they're still going to feel the same way about you because it's never been about what you say, it's about who you are.
I somewhat agree with that, Dante, and you have that very similar issue. And that's the reason why Canelo Alvarez is not number one pound for pound on your list. Now, certain people may say, oh, well, maybe he just doesn't believe that Canelo Alvarez is truly the number one pound for pound fighter. Yes, but when there's a repeated pattern, when it comes down to it, where basically every fighter, like a Lomachenko or a Canelo Alvarez, or even certain other fighters that have been ranked high in the pound for pound list, like a Tyson Fury, and basically all those fighters, what you notice what they have in common is that they're pretty much the best within their few weight classes. When you try to basically degrade every single one of those fighters, basically what that becomes is a pattern. Basically what that becomes is a trend. So it's very obvious that Dante's Boxing Nation, he has a very big racial issue.
Color of your skin. Devin Haney can tell you that because Devin Haney was constantly praising Canelo, saying that he was pound for pound the best fighter in the world. And then they still booed him when they seen him at the fight. These were all Canelo Alvarez.
Well, Devin Haney still believes that Canelo Alvarez is the clear number one pound for pound. So has Devin Haney overall not realized yet that maybe a certain amount of these fans aren't going to like him anyway? Or does he truly overall believe that Canelo is the number one pound for pound? So, I believe all in all that Devin Haney truly believes that Canelo is the real number one pound for pound, as he should. It is what it is. Anyway.
Alvarez fans booing this man. And they're booing a fighter that wants all the smoke at lightweight. The man who's calling out everyone. Right? They don't care about any of that. The only thing they care about is race. Your race in particular. That's why they're called race fans. These are not boxing fans. This is why the only thing these black fighters should be focused on is keep winning. That's all you got to worry about. Don't worry about no comments. Just keep winning. Just keep proving yourself once again like Floyd Mayweather did, like Pernell Whitaker did, like Roy Jones Jr. did, like Terrence Crawford is doing. And the list goes on and on. Andre Ward, etc., etc.
Right, but the problem is with Terrence Crawford is that, in my opinion, just at the current moment in time, he cannot be the number one pound for pound fighter. taking a look overall, except this is a little bit of a different situation. I'm a results-oriented person. And many people, for how many years, when I was watching the NFL, I always heard so many people basically say that Aaron Rodgers, that he truly was actually greater than some of the other quarterbacks, like that of a Tom Brady. You even heard certain people, I don't know, basically say that he was the greatest quarterback of all time. And if he overall was the one with Bill Belichick, that all in all, he would actually be the one that would be referred to as the most accomplished or the most valuable, yada, 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 yada. But then after a while, basically people have been starting to see what I've been saying about Aaron Rodgers all along, which is that even though he's extremely talented and debatably all in all the most talented quarterback that I've ever seen throw the football, he cannot come up nearly as big in the big moments. So at the end of the day, you cannot be on the same level as some of those other guys. It is what it is. Now, Terrence Crawford and Canelo is a different situation because, in my opinion, when you talk about their skill set, in my view, there's someone on the same level in terms of skills, but I maybe would even put Canelo above Terrence Bud Crawford. I think Terrence Bud Crawford, all in all, I think that Terrence has better footwork than Canelo, but almost every other category, I think I would give to Canelo.
There is no doubt about it. Shakur Stevenson, he would beat Canelo easy if they were naturally the same weight class. And then he's a southpaw on top of all of that?
Right, but like I said, how are you going to quantify that, Dante? And if we really wanted to make that point, there are certain fighters overall that I would say, like a Gervonta Tank Davis, for example, if he was the same weight class as the Terrence Bud Crawford, we can make the point all the live long damn day that Gervonta Tank Davis said he would debatably beat Terrence Crawford. When I take a look at Gervonta Tank Davis, he looks more defensively responsible than that of a Terrence Bud Crawford, but I can't put him above Terrence on the pound-for-pound list because he doesn't have those type of accomplishments. So it is what it is.
Look at what Bill...
And like I said, even if you are talking about skill set, Canelo is debatably the most skilled fighter in all the world. It just is what it is.
Joe Saunders was doing to Canelo Alvarez, what Caleb Plant was doing, what Kovalev, an old faded Kovalev who had been knocked out twice, what he was doing to Canelo.
Right, but that Kovalev was coming off of two very decent victories. So let's just not sit here and pretend overall that Canelo, that he was just defeating nobodies. These fighters that you just mentioned were all legitimate, decent A-grade fighters. And if you want to compare that to Mr. Terrence Bud Crawford, we can sit here and talk about overall what he was able to do or what he was not able to do, sometimes against like that of a Jose Benavidez, or someone like that overall against the Aegis Kavalaskas.
Man, go back and watch Canelo versus Amir Khan and then watch Terrence Crawford versus Amir Khan. Amir Khan was completely outboxing Canelo Alvarez and doing it with...
No, he was not, Dante. Amir Khan was able to beat Canelo Alvarez throughout the first two rounds, and then after that, Canelo made some adjustments. And Canelo, in my opinion, even today, is much more skilled than what he was back then in the Amir Khan fight.
Ease. Until he got knocked out by a man that was 30 pounds bigger than him. Crawford, on the other hand, he was beating Amir Khan at his own game. He outboxed him and then...
Well, you can argue that Terrence Crawford, all in all, that he beat Amir Khan. You know what's so funny? He just said, all in all, recently that that overall Canelo fought an old, faded Sergey Kovalev. Wasn't Amir Khan already knocked out 3 separate times by the time Terrence Bud Crawford fought him? But that doesn't seem to come up. Anyways, when it comes down to... But you can argue that Terrence Crawford had the better performance against Amir Khan. But there's also a few performances in Terrence Crawford's career where you can maybe argue that he didn't do extremely hot. I mean, take a look at Terrence Bud Crawford in his last performance against Sean Porter. You can maybe debate that he lost 3 or 4 rounds in that fight. Now, of course, that was the biggest fight in his career, so I'm not going to get after him too much. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, let's just not sit here and act like Terrence Crawford, especially against higher grade competition, is just 100% more dominant than Canelo Alvarez.
So everyone knows that. In fact, deep down in their heart, Canelo Alvarez fans are saying, thank God Shakur Stevenson is not in Canelo Alvarez's division. Thank God Terrence Crawford is not in Canelo Alvarez's division. That's what they're saying deep down in their heart. Now, of course, they're going to say some crazy racist, indirect stuff in the comment section, but this is how they feel deep down in their heart. That's the reason why they never wanted the Charlo and Andrade fights. At least these Canelo Alvarez fans I'm talking about.
So basically, what is that you saying? That you don't think that there's a Terrence Crawford or Shakur Stevenson within those weight classes, and I would agree.
About in particular. Because when they see those type of fights, and I'm talking about 6 years ago, I'm not even talking about now, I'm talking about 6 years ago, when both Charlo brothers were the champions, when Andre was the champion and Canelo was beltless. I'm talking about at 160, when Andre was the champion and Charlo was Canelo's mandatory. I'm talking about then. Those fans didn't want to see these fights. You know why? Because when they thought about those fights, they thought about Chavez suffering his first loss to...
Well, I think all in all that those are great fights, but are those fights really as good as some of the fights that Canelo is taking now? I mean, maybe you can debate that they're as good as a Caleb Plant or a Billy Joe Saunders fight, but the Dimitri Bivol fight, I can't get after Canelo Alvarez for taking that fight, because in my opinion, that is debatably one of the two most dangerous fights out there for him. So I can't get after Canelo Alvarez for taking that fight. And Dante, apparently you would agree with me, because at one point in time not too long ago, about a couple weeks ago, you said that you thought Dimitri Bivol would beat Canelo Alvarez hands down. One of the only two fighters that would beat him hands down.
Pernell Whitaker or Frankie Randall. They thought about Oscar De La Hoya suffering his first loss to Mosley. They thought about Barrera suffering his first loss to Junior Jones.
Actually, Oscar De La Hoya's first loss was to Felix Tito Trinidad, but it is what it is, unless you're basically not counting that because, you know, Tito Trinidad, maybe you thought it was controversial, I don't know.
They thought about Fernando Vargas suffering his first loss to Tito Trinidad. They thought about Canelo Alvarez suffering his first loss to Floyd Mayweather. And all of those fighters that I just mentioned were some of the greatest. I didn't just mention some undefeated fighter. Those were the greatest Mexican fighters of all time. And this is the reason why, you know, I tell you guys all the time, the racism in Mexico is nowhere near the level it is in America when it comes to Mexican fans. The majority, unfortunately, the majority of Mexican American fans are very racist.
Anyways, that's pretty much about it for this video, because the rest of it overall I don't really think is stuff that we need to include. But anyways, that's really overall about it for this video. And overall, we will see all in all what happens with Mr. Canelo Alvarez in this next fight. But like I said, I just thought that I would review this video because once again, Dante, of course, if you're someone overall that's going to go to his channel and maybe new to boxing, or if you try to go to his channel, of course, he is going to try to convince you and fool you that the only reason why Canelo is ranked #1 pound for pound is because basically his complexion. While when we really take a look at the reality, Canelo Alvarez is truly ranked #1 pound for pound, not only because he's a decently popular fighter, but when you take a look at his skill set, Canelo very clearly, in my view, overall, at least debatably, is the most skilled boxer in all the boxing right now. At least he's up there with anyone out there. And on top of that, when you combine his resume and his accomplishments, there's just no other better answer, in my opinion, for the #1 pound for pound fighter than that of a solo Canelo Alvarez. But we'll see what happens. Anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.